Hi, this is Anthony with the Piano Dojo. Today, we're going to take a look at some basic keyboard proficiency. This is actually the very first video in this series, and in fact, it is what I would consider a prerequisite video before we actually get started. At first in these videos, it may feel like a lot of new stuff is being thrown at you, and I always tell all of my students that we're sort of in this takeoff phase, and it will feel like a lot is being thrown at you, but bear with me. By the time we get to about our third or fourth video, we will have reached about a cruising altitude, and instead of it feeling like a lot of new stuff coming at you, we will enter into a very predictable cycle from video to video of exactly what we need to be practicing and what we're going to be practicing next. It's going to become super predictable, and that's how we want it. So stick with me through these first videos while I orient you to this process, and we'll go ahead and get started today with our introduction to the piano keyboard and the grand staff, and a couple proto scales that we're going to end up combining to make all of the scales and chords that we're going to be looking at down the road, okay? So you can see that here on this outline, but we're going to go ahead and look first at the first item here, the keyboard worksheet. So we use letters to talk about the keyboard, right? Each key is given a name A through G, and then it repeats again, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So we'll go ahead and write some of those names down on the keyboard now. But the thing about music is that it doesn't actually always start from A. It's not somewhere where musicians really think about starting from. A lot of things in music start from C. So on this top keyboard that we'll start with labeling today, we are actually going to start on a C. All right, so we have our C right here. We'll be talking about C throughout the day today. But right after that, it just continues in alphabetical order. So we have D, E, F, G, now we're back to A, B, and now we have completed back to C. Now if you'll notice, when we complete a pattern like that on the keyboard, we have 7 notes, and then the 8th note is the repeat. So anytime we repeat a pattern of keys, we call that up an octave or down an octave. It's 1 octave because it's a group of 8 notes. It's the repeat of the pattern, and you're going to hear that a lot, not only today, but throughout the day. So now the thing about the keyboard is that as you go to the right of the keyboard, we call that going up because the notes themselves are getting higher in pitch, which means that on a physics level, the frequency of their vibration is faster. And conversely, if we go to the left on the keyboard, we say we're going down because that means that the pitches of the actual notes are getting lower and their frequencies are, in a physical term, vibrating at a lower frequency, making a lower sound. Now, when it comes to the black keys, all right, we're actually going to have to learn a couple new pieces of terminology. And so I'm going to draw these symbols up here at the top of the page. We have what looks like the hashtag, but in music we call the sharp. And then we have what looks like a lowercase b, and I'm actually going to use a lowercase b because on this PDF editor I don't have an actual font for flat. So I hope the music police don't come and arrest me, but I'm going to use a lowercase b, but we call that a flat, all right? Now here's the deal, we're going to be talking about something today called the half step when we get into our scales. And what that basically means is the smallest interval that you can go on the piano. So when you go from one key up to the next black key, up to the next white key, and you don't skip any keys, we call that a half step. And a sharp is telling us to take a certain kind of half step in an upward way. The sharp goes up. And therefore our flat, if you think about a flat tire or a ball that gets flat, it goes down. If we go ahead and look at C again, if you were to take that tiny half step, start on the C and go up to this black key, then we would name the key C sharp. Every black key is going to have 2 names. It's going to have a sharp name when we go from a white key up to that black key, or if we go back down, for instance, from this D down to that same key, that would be its flat name. So we would call that D flat. That is our completed octave of keys. All of the names we have A through G, although in this example I started from C and ended on C, and then every black key has a sharp note, and a flat name. So that is our keyboard. And like I said, this worksheet does come with the subscriber content. And so one thing that I would recommend doing if you do get that is to print this out and just write down all the names of the keys, black notes and white notes, both names of the black notes all the way down. There's plenty here. In fact, I would even do it double-sided, because when it comes to this basic stuff, the easiest way to learn it is just putting pencil to paper and getting some sheer repetition in. All right. Now let's talk about the reading part, how we read things that correspond to the keyboard. All right. And for that, we use something called the grand staff. So I'm going to switch over to our grand staff, and here we have it. The grand staff is actually made out of two staffs, two clefs that we would call it. On the top, we have what we call the treble clef, and underneath the treble clef, we have what's called the bass clef. All right. Now, the thing about these clefs is that they do have these fancy names and they are some fancy shapes, but is that it? Is it just a fancy shape hundreds of years old that we use for no reason? Actually, no. The thing is that these shapes do have a meaning. All right. So as you can see, I'm going to draw your attention first to the treble clef. The circle at the bottom of the treble clef right here is actually very meaningful, because it kind of creates a target. I'm going to go ahead and draw that for you. So if we look at this line that goes through that circle at the bottom of the treble clef, we notice that it will end up on a G. All right. Each line and space in this staff does represent a note. In this case, that G is what's represented by that line right there. Okay. So the treble clef is also known as the G clef. Now, you may be asking, but which G? Which G exactly is the treble clef talking about? Well, in order to understand that, we're going to have to talk about a very special C. Now, remember, I told you we were going to be talking about C's today, right? Music loves C. And I'm going to go ahead and circle, oops, not cross out, I want to use a circle here. We're going to circle this C. This is a very special C. As you can notice, it's so special, it gets its own line that they add underneath the treble clef. It's called a ledger line. But this C is what we call middle C, all right? And it is on the middle of your keyboard. If you have an acoustic piano or a grand piano, when the lid flips up and the name is under there, usually the middle C is about right in the middle of that. But even if you have a keyboard that doesn't exactly show you middle C, that's okay. Just find the C that's the closest to the middle of your piano, and the treble clef is on the right side, the bass clef is on the left side. So we have our middle C, and the treble clef technically is indicating the G above that middle C on the keyboard. So a little bit of orientation. Let's talk about the bass clef now, because it also has a special meaning. Between these two dots, if we go all the way over to that line, we notice that we land on an F. So our bass clef is also known as, I'll write this down here, the F clef, because what it does is it indicates the F below the middle C on the piano. All right? Excellent. Now, like I mentioned earlier, when you move to the right on the keyboard, you end up going higher in pitch. And the same is on the treble clef, you go up on your treble clefs, or even on the bass clef, as you go from the bottom of the bass clef up to the top of the treble clef, you're going to get higher in pitch, and vice versa. As you go down from the top of the treble down to the bottom of the bass, you're going to get lower in pitch. Okay. Now let's talk about how the letters correspond to the lines and spaces of the grand staff. Okay. The circles that are written, the notes right here, these are called whole notes. And we're going to talk more about notes and actual note values in our next video, video B, the next prerequisite, where we talk about rhythm. So just hang with me today, and you can think of this as a circle, or if you already know what a whole note is, these are whole notes. But what we really want to talk about is the lines and spaces and the notes that they represent. Now, I'm sure you've heard many times people say things like "every good boy does fine" or "all cows eat grass," in order to remember lines of the treble clef and spaces of the treble clef and the lines of the bass clef and the lines of the spaces of the bass clef. It can get kind of crazy when you're trying to remember 4 different sayings for 4 different sets of notes on there. So we're going to talk about a much easier way to do that, because there's actually something much more elegant and quick for doing that. Now, the good old-fashioned way to read is simply to go zigzag, because as you go in this zigzag motion from line to space and space to line, you are just going to go in alphabetical order, C to D, D to E, E to F, F to G, G to A back to B, so on and so forth. But that can get tedious sometimes when you're having to count up like that. And so there is a quicker way that doesn't involve zigzagging your way up, and it also doesn't involve having to remember which one of these sayings it is. And that saying right here, I'll type it, is F-A-C-E, face, and then G-B-D. All right? If you can just remember face, G-B-D, then you'll be able to read straight up the staff using all the spaces or all the lines. So let's take a look at that. If we look down here at the bottom of the bass clef, we start with a, sorry about that, let me get a circle going here. We have F, then we have A, C, E, G, B, and continuing it up, we have D, right? Then we have F, A, C, E, G, and then if we kept going, we would have our B and our D. Same with the lines. We have our G, B, D, F, A, C, E, G, B, D, F, and if we kept going, we could get more F, A, C, E. So just remember that if you want to go straight up or straight down the lines and spaces, all you really need to remember is face, GBD, and you'll be good. Excellent. Now, the subscriber content does include this template for you to, this is a nice thing to have sitting on your piano next to you for some reference. But if you want to get in some good old-fashioned practice, then I made this worksheet right here. And what it is each of these notes, what you would do is you would go and you would write all of the G's right here, all of the A's right here. There's usually about 4, and it's not fun. A lot of my students refer to it as musical torture, but it's definitely worth it, because if you get through all of these letters, by the time you're done, just through sheer repetition, you will have a much more solid intuition of the names of the lines and spaces and where you can find these notes. But I'll do it as best I can drawing on the computer here. I'll show you we'd have a G here, a G there, a G here. And once you get the first ones of these done, you can really just copy and paste the rest of them. I want you to notice as you do go up that you do skip from line to space and space to line. So for instance, if we have a C here, well then our next C is going to be on a line, and it's going to be a special line. It's going to be our middle C right there. Now, like I said, I apologize for the sloppiness of drawing with a mouse on the keyboard here, but when you do write this out, we want to try to be neat and line up our whole notes or circles as best we can. Alrighty. So, like I said, this is another one of the things included in the subscriber content. So we've talked about the names of our keys, the white notes and the black notes. We've talked about our staff that we use to read that. And now we can finally go ahead and put our hands on this instrument itself. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn a couple proto scales that throughout the next few lessons we're going to be putting these together and combining them to make all of the basic scales and chords that we'll be using the rest of the time. The first one is called the chromatic scale, all right? And we're going to bring back that term that I had talked about earlier called the half step. Now there is a more fancy music theory name for half step, and that is the minor second. So that's good to know. Like music has a tendency to have multiple names for everything. So half steps are good, minor seconds are good. You're going to hear them both, so you might as well get used to them. Now, before we actually do get to get started on playing this, we can kind of see this table here. We have our notes up at the top. I did just choose to use the sharp names of the keys, but that doesn't mean that the flat names are any less valid. And then underneath we have a row for our right hand and a row for our left hand. And then each one of those numbers corresponds to a finger on your hand. So let's go ahead and talk about the fingers and the numbers that correspond to each finger. All right, we're going to start with our thumb. Now on either hand, the thumb is going to be the same number despite the fact that they are mirror images of each other. We label the thumb as 1, so we're going to label that thumb. Our 2 is going to be our index finger. Our third finger, which I won't hold up individually, is going to be our middle finger. Our 4 is going to be our ring finger. And our 5th is going to be our pinky. And like I said, this is the same for both hands. All right? So whenever it goes to say, if you see a 1 under C, then you put your thumb on the C. If you see a 3 on your C sharp, then you put your middle finger on the C sharp. All right. So I'm also going to switch over here to my piano on the screen when I talk about this. And we're going to start on our C with our thumb as the diagram says. Just like that, all right? Now as we go up, what we want to do as you move your fingers 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, is you don't want to be twisting. You don't want to twist to get your fingers there, and you don't want to swing your elbow out. One symptom of too much twisting is if you notice that your elbow is swinging out. Think about lifting your entire arm with your hand attached and the fingers attached to that across and dropping them down. This is a much more elegant and efficient motion than flapping your arm like a bird, all right? So as we go up, what we're going to do is we're going to go with our 1 on C, and then we're going to put our middle finger up to the C sharp. Then we're going to lift our arm and we're going to bring our thumb back down onto the 1, and then we're going to put our middle finger up onto the D sharp. Now here's where our 2 comes in this little gap where we have no black key. So you're going to have your thumb, your second finger, and then your middle finger all in a row, and it creates a nice little slide right there that you can use, right? Now you know what? I'm going to go ahead and add the names of the notes here. So there we go. We can actually see these notes now. There we have our C, D. So going up, like I said, 1, 3. We're going to have our finger slide 1, 2, 3. And we're going to keep going up 1, 3. Now notice I'm not going fast. We're not trying to be sprinters here. We just want to work our way up almost more like yoga. Now I've gotten back to my next C, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to work our way back down, because think about it. Music on the keyboard moves in both directions, all right? So moving back down, we're going to start on our 2 and we're going to go down to our thumb. Then we've got our third finger on the black key like it's pretty much always going to do here. Back to our middle finger, thumb on G, middle finger on F sharp, 2 on F, 1 on E. We have our D sharp, D, C sharp, and C. There we go. Now let's take a look at what that will look like with your left hand, because you're going to want to practice this with both your right and your left hand. So the left hand, I'm going to have to turn over here and actually do this. But again, I'm not going to go fast. I'm going to take my time, because I like to treat this more like yoga at first than I do worrying about how quickly I'm playing. If you learn how to go slow, then that's the best way to learn how to go fast. Some people want to immediately start playing as quickly as they can, but trust me, if you want to develop speed and control, you'll learn how to go slow first. All right? So on my guide, what I ask you to do is to practice playing this hands separately with your right hand and your left hand. Now you don't need to become a superstar playing this scale. You don't need to become an Olympic chromatic scale athlete. I really just want you to be able to do half steps, because we are going to be using those to create major scales. I'll be a little bit more, I'll recommend a little bit more practice with the major scales, but for these half steps, you can just become familiar with them and be able to do them easily. Now, if you want to go the extra mile, one thing that I would recommend is perhaps trying to do it hands together, which would mean you would start 1 octave apart and slowly work your way up. And here, I'll turn it back to the piano so you can see what I'm doing. Just nice and easy, like that. The trickiest part is going to be remembering when the right hand and the left hand do something slightly different with the second finger. But hopefully, if you've practiced enough hands separately, they'll fall into line for you. All right, so there you go. That's your chromatic scale using half steps. And for this week, you'll want to get yourself familiar with that. Now, if we're talking about the half step, it goes to say that the next component to the half step would be the whole step, all right? And a whole step, let me show you what that looks like, is basically is 2 half steps. So if this is 1 half step from C to C sharp, and from C to C sharp to D, that's 2 half steps, 1, 2. Then 2 half steps equals a whole step. It's not exactly rocket science, and so if we were to go up our whole steps, remember from here, some people get hung up from here to here as a whole step, because in this case you have to skip this half step right there, okay? Now, but here's the thing about the whole steps and the way I like to do them. It's a little different than the half steps. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do this. There's many ways to play these scales, but for this one, I like to, we're getting used to using both of our hands at the same time, so we're gonna make each one of these scales a cooperative effort between both hands instead of splitting it up like we did with the chromatic scale, all right? So we're gonna start, as you can see here, our left hand is going to take the first 3 notes of this 6-note scale, and our right hand is going to take the second 3 notes. And it's actually pretty easy. This is a very symmetrical shape, all right? A lot of times I'm going to be talking about throughout this series about remembering scales, not necessarily by the names of the notes, but by the shape of the keys on the piano, all right? So what we do is we're going to take our middle finger of our right hand and we're going to put it on the first 3 white notes, or C, D, E. And our right hand we're going to place on those top black notes. And you can just play it up and down like that. Now, one thing that you can do with this, because it is a very easy scale, I'm going to want you to do it 2 octaves. So that means that you're going to start with, and you're going to play the pattern once. You're going to move your hands out of the way and replace them down. Remember, we always want to lift our hands when we move. We're also going to play it back down. You see how I'm moving one hand as the other hand is playing? Things like that. Nice and slow, take it easy. As a composer, when I hear scales, I always think to myself, ooh, what is that sound and how could I use that to develop some kind of emotion or color? And as you can hear with these whole steps, it's very dreamy, and I like to call the whole step the dreamy scale because it sort of has that very cliche, old school, dreamy vibe to it. Now, if we're going to take a look at the next scale, I'll scroll down just a little bit here. We have our next whole tone scale, and this one's a little bit more tricky, although, whole steps are not the biggest thing in the world, so don't sweat it, but it is less symmetrical visually, and I think that's what makes it challenging. But it's going to produce about the same sound, and it's going to go like this. We're going to have our middle finger on the D flat, our second finger on the E flat, and then get your thumb up to that F, and then we have our 3 white notes G, A, and B here, and it will be sort of the same drill. 2 octaves, remember? And you can go nice and slow as you need. All right? So there we have our whole steps, and we have our half steps, and our chromatic scale and our whole tone scales. And this week what I'm going to want you to do is to practice those 2 octaves for the whole tone scales and 1 octave with the chromatic scale, although go wild, see how many octaves you can get it if you want. We have this grand staff sheet if you're a subscriber, and also this template for all of your notes. And then of course we talked about the names of those keys and how they correspond to sharps and flats for the black notes. There's only a few more videos left until we reach that cruising altitude and we're going in a very predictable cycle and you've learned most of the terminology. The next video is going to have a rhythmic component because one of the most important parts of piano proficiency, and especially just music proficiency in general, is that we understand rhythm, because it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, and it's very difficult to read notes if you're not able to understand the rhythms that those notes are being written in. So the next video, I hope you'll check that out. You can, if you'd like to access the subscriber content, you can do that through my website at pianodojo.com, where you can find all of these worksheets to all of the videos. So I hope you enjoy. Again, my name is Anthony with the Piano Dojo. Happy practicing, and I'll see you next time when we can talk about some rhythm. Bye.